Didn't spend her first morning in the archives weeping over her demotion. Instead, she brought a small desk lamp from home and a pair of reading glasses. If Liam wanted her in the dark, she would become the brightest thing in it. Ella knew Liam's routine. Every morning at 9:00 a.m., he checked the digital logs of the company's historical archives from his tablet. She began her move. She didn't send him an email. She didn't call him. Instead, she began to digitize the files, but not just any files. She started with the safety inspection reports from the month before the fire. She knew that as he scrolled through his morning reports, he would see the updates. He would see her name, Brooks E., attached to documents that showed his father had been warned about the faulty valves 3 times before the explosion. Up on the 100th floor, Liam sat in his leather chair, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. He opened his tablet, intending to focus on the merger with a London firm, but his eyes kept drifting to the recently updated section of the server. Brooks E. Updated, Safety Report May 2015, PDF. Brooks E. Updated, Insurance Policy Redline, PDF. His jaw tightened. She was talking to him through the data. She was haunting him with facts. Every time he looked at his screen, her name was there like a pulse. Meanwhile, Isabella was starting to feel the walls closing in. She had expected Ella to quit. She had expected her to crawl back to the Bronx in defeat. But the fact that Ella was staying in the basement, quietly working, terrified her. Isabella walked into Liam's office without knocking, her silk dress rustling aggressively. "Liam, we need to talk about the basement. It's a security risk having her down there with the sensitive archives. I've arranged for a third-party shredding company to come and clear out the old boxes. We need to modernize." Liam looked up from his tablet. His eyes were cold and there were dark circles under them. "No one touches those boxes, Isabella, and no one goes into the basement without my personal authorization, not even you." "But Liam." "Get out," he said, his voice a low growl. At 11:00 p.m., when the building was a silent tomb of glass, Liam couldn't stop himself. He didn't take the elevator to the lobby. He took it to the basement. He found Ella asleep at a small metal table, her head resting on a stack of yellowed papers. The industrial light above her cast long, dramatic shadows. She looked so small, so defenseless, yet her hand was still clutching a pen, as if she were ready to fight even in her dreams. He walked closer, his heart thudding in his chest. He saw the file she was working on. It was a list of the families who had lost fathers in the fire. His eyes stopped at the bottom of the list. Samuel Brooks, compensation, DNIED, reason, employee error. Liam felt a wave of nausea. He looked at the thread on his wrist. It felt like it was choking him. He reached out to touch her hair to wake her to apologize, but then he remembered the bank statements Isabella had shown him. "Who are you, Ella?" he whispered to the silence. "A saint or a snake?" Suddenly, Ella's eyes snapped open. She didn't jump. She just looked at him, her gaze clear and piercing. "I'm the truth you're afraid to tell yourself, Liam," she said, her voice raspy from sleep, "and I'm not going anywhere until you hear it." In the dimly lit basement, the air felt electric. Liam was standing so close that Ella could see the reflection of the flickering bulb in his gray eyes, eyes that were currently a storm of confusion and longing. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ella," Liam said, his voice a rough whisper that vibrated in the small space. "Digitizing those files, sending them to my personal dashboard. You're trying to brainwash me into hating my own father." Ella stood up slowly, her legs stiff from hours of sitting on the concrete. She didn't back away. She stepped closer until her chest was almost touching his expensive wool coat. "I don't have to make you hate him, Liam. The truth is doing that all by itself," she said, her voice steady. She reached for a dusty, heavy ledger on the table. "Look at this. This isn't a summary made by lawyers. This is the handwritten payroll from the week of the fire." She opened it to a page marked with a dried, pressed sunflower, a flower from the meadow they used to play in. Liam's breath hitched. "Look at the signatures, Liam. Your father didn't just deny the compensation. He sued the widows. He sued my mother for the damage my father supposedly caused to the machines. That's why we were evicted. That's why we ended up in the slums. Your wealth was built on the lawsuits that destroyed our lives." Liam grabbed the ledger, his knuckles turning white. He saw the cold, calculated signatures of Arthur Kingsley. Every line of ink felt like a whip across his back. He looked at the sunflower, the symbol of their childhood, lying dead between pages of corporate greed. "I didn't know," Liam choked out, his voice finally breaking. "I was only 15. They told me it was a tragic accident. They told me your family moved away for a better life." "A better life," Ella laughed, a sound filled with tears. My mother scrubbed toilets until her fingers bled so I could go to school. I ate bread and water so I could buy books. That's the better life your father gave us." Suddenly, the smell of ozone filled the air, not from a machine, but from something burning. Isabella, watching from the security cameras in her office, had seen enough. She knew that if Liam stayed in that basement for one more hour, her life was over. She had activated the emergency suppression system remotely, but she had rigged it. Instead of releasing gas to put out a fire, she had triggered a short circuit in the old wiring of the archives. Bam! A junction box at the far end of the room exploded in a shower of sparks. The dry, ancient paper in the boxes caught fire instantly. The basement, the only place where the truth lived, was turning into a furnace. "The files," Ella screamed, lunging toward the box of original notes. "Liam, the proof, we have to save it." The smoke was thick and black, swirling around them. Liam grabbed Ella's waist, pulling her back as a shelf of burning ledgers collapsed. "Forget the papers, Ella, we have to get out." "No, if these burn, my father stays a traitor forever. I won't let him die twice." She fought against his grip, her eyes wild with desperation. Liam looked at the fire, then at the woman in his arms. In that moment, the CEO died. The boy from the meadow came back. He didn't run for the exit. He lunged into the smoke, his expensive coat catching fire at the hem, and grabbed the heavy box of original notes. He threw the box toward the elevator and tackled Ella to the ground, just as another explosion rocked the room. Minutes later, the automated sprinklers finally kicked in, drenching everything in freezing water. Liam lay on the wet concrete, coughing, his face streaked with soot, clutching the box to his chest as if it were a child. Ella crawled toward him, her heart in her throat. Liam, are you okay?" He looked up at her, his eyes clear for the first time in 10 years. He reached out with his wet, shaking hand and touched the blue bead on his wrist. It was charred, but it was still there. "I believe you, Ella," he whispered through the coughs. "I believe everything, and God help anyone who stands in our way now." They escaped the LK Tower moments before the sirens wailed. Liam looked like a ghost of the man he was. His tuxedo, worth more than most people's houses, was shredded and stained with soot. But in his arms, he clutched the heavy metal box of archives like it was a holy relic. "We aren't going to my penthouse, Ella," Liam said, his voice gravelly from the smoke as he steered his black SUV through the rain-slicked streets. "Isabella has eyes there. She's turned my own security against me. I need a place where the elite never look." "Then we go to the Bronx," Ella replied, her face pale but her eyes burning. "To the dungeon. It's the only place where ghosts can hide." When they arrived at the crumbling apartment, Ella's mother nearly collapsed. Seeing the most powerful man in New York, the son of the man who ruined her, standing in her tiny kitchen was a shock she wasn't prepared for. Liam didn't act like a king. He looked around the room, seeing the cracks in the walls and the smell of cheap tea. He saw Ella's diplomas framed in plastic. Without a word, he knelt on the linoleum floor before Ella's mother. He took her weathered, trembling hand and kissed it. "I am sorry," he whispered, a decade of guilt finally breaking his voice. "I didn't know the price of my throne was your tears. I am here to burn down the temple my father built on your husband's grave." They cleared the small wooden table and opened the singed box. Under the flickering light of a single bulb, Liam's CEO brain took over, but this time he was a general planning a coup. "Isabella isn't the only one, Ella," Liam said, pointing to a signature on a document. "Marcus, the head of the board of directors, was my father's silent partner. They didn't just hide the truth, they traded it for insurance money. We have to be surgical." As Ella brought him a damp towel to wipe the soot from his face, the silence between them was heavy. She touched his cheek, her fingers trembling. "Why did you keep the blue bead, Liam, even when you hated me?" she asked. "Because it was the only part of me that was still alive," he replied, leaning into her touch. But the moment of peace was shattered. Liam's phone buzzed on the table. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number, Isabella's private line. "I know you're there, Liam. The dungeon has a back door and I've sent a cleanup crew. You have 60 seconds to walk out alone and hand over the box, or the whole building becomes a funeral pyre. Choose carefully, your legacy or the girl." Liam looked at the countdown on his screen. The shadows outside the window moved. The lioness wasn't waiting for the board meeting. She was going for the kill. The red numbers on Liam's phone screen flickered like a heartbeat, 59, 58, 57. Liam's mind, usually a cold machine of logic, was racing. He looked at the heavy box of evidence, then at Ella's terrified mother, and finally at Ella. She was standing by the stove, her eyes fixed on him, waiting. Liam, you have to go, Ella whispered, her voice shaking. Take the box and leave through the fire escape. If you stay, Isabella wins. If you survive, the truth survives. I spent 10 years leaving you behind, Ella, Liam growled, his eyes dark with a fierce protectiveness. I'm not doing it again. Liam grabbed the heavy metal box and threw it into the old, grease-stained oven. Mom, Ella, get under the heavy wooden table, now. 403938. Liam didn't run. He grabbed a kitchen knife and a heavy flashlight. He knew Isabella's cleanup crew wouldn't just blow the building. They'd want to make sure the body was identified. They were coming through the door first. The door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. Two men in tactical gear, faces hidden by gas masks, burst in, but they didn't expect the Ice King to be waiting in the dark. Liam used the darkness of the apartment to his advantage. He swung the heavy flashlight, cracking the first man's mask. As the second man raised his silenced pistol, Ella, doing the bravest thing she'd ever done, threw a pot of boiling water she had kept on the stove for tea. The man screamed, his aim faltering. Liam tackled him, wrestling the weapon away. 15-14-13. The back window now, Liam shouted, grabbing Ella's mother in his arms. They scrambled through the narrow window onto the rusty fire escape just as a small, high-tech incendiary device hissed in the hallway. They were halfway down the ladder when the apartment erupted in a fireball. The shockwave threw them against the iron railings. Ella looked up, watching her home, the only thing her father had left them, burn into ash. But as the flames licked the sky, she saw Liam. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was holding her mother steady. He looked at the burning building, then at the street below where a black SUV was idling, waiting for the crew to finish. They think we're dead, Liam whispered, his voice cold and sharp as a razor. Let them believe it for 24 hours. The box, Ella sobbed. The evidence is gone, Liam. It was in the oven. Liam wiped the blood from his eye and gave her a grim, triumphant smile. The oven is fireproof steel, Ella, and I already scanned the most important pages to a private cloud server before we even started talking. Isabella just committed arson and attempted murder on camera. I have her. They disappeared into the dark alleys of the Bronx, three ghosts moving through the rain. Liam took them to a safe house, not a penthouse, but a small, hidden basement under an old library he had funded years ago. For the next day, the world thought Liam Kingsley had perished in a tragic accident in a slum fire. Isabella was already at the LK Tower, drinking champagne, preparing to take over the board. But in the dark basement of the library, Ella and Liam were preparing the execution. The library was an old, neo-Gothic building with high ceilings and the smell of ancient parchment. Beneath its foundations lay a hidden bunker, a place Liam had built years ago when he first started realizing that his father's enemies might one day become his own. Ella sat on a wooden crate, her hands still trembling. Her lungs felt heavy with the smoke of her burned home. Across from her, her mother was sleeping on a small cot, exhausted by the trauma. Liam was at a small desk, hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen. He had stripped off his ruined tuxedo jacket, and his white shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a nasty burn from the fire escape. "Let me look at that," Ella said, her voice barely a whisper in the vast, echoing basement. Liam didn't argue. He sat still as Ella approached with a small first-aid kit. As she gently dabbed antiseptic on his burn, he hissed in pain. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," Liam replied, his eyes fixed on her face. "It's a small price to pay for the truth. For 10 years I lived in a castle made of lies, Ella. This burn, it's the most real thing I've felt in a decade." Ella looked at his wrist. The memory thread was blackened by soot, the blue bead dull and scratched. The bracelet, it's ruined. "No," Liam said, grabbing her hand before she could pull away. "It's tempered like us. It survived the fire just like the girl who made it." For the next few hours, they worked in a symbiotic rhythm. While the world above them mourned the death of a billionaire, they were dissecting Isabella's life. Ella's fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just an assistant now, she was a digital assassin. "Liam, look at this. Isabella didn't just forge the documents. She's been siphoning money from the company's pension fund into an offshore account in the Caymans. She wasn't just protecting your father's secret, she was using it to blackmail Marcus and the rest of the board." Liam leaned in, his jaw tightening. "So she's not just a liar, she's a thief. She's been stealing from the same workers my father betrayed." As the clock struck 4:00 a.m., the exhaustion finally began to take its toll. Ella leaned her head against Liam's shoulder, her eyes closing. Do you think they'll believe us, Liam, when we walk into that room, when we come back from the dead, or will they just see a crazy girl and a man who lost his mind? Liam wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. The scent of soot and old books was between them, but for the first time there was no glass ceiling separating them. They won't have a choice, Ella, Liam whispered into her hair, because tomorrow I'm not walking in as their CEO. I'm walking in as the boy from the meadow, and I'm bringing the storm with me. While Liam and Ella were shivering in the damp silence of the library basement, the 100th floor of the LK Tower was glowing with a celebration that felt like a funeral for a king. Isabella stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of crystal-clear gin in her hand. She was wearing black not out of grief, but because black was the color of ultimate power. To the public, she had spent the afternoon crying in front of the cameras, playing the loyal employee devastated by the loss of her boss in a tragic fire. But here, in the privacy of the CEO's office, her eyes were cold and triumphant. To the late Liam Kingsley, she toasted her reflection in the glass, a man who had everything but was too weak to keep it. The door opened and Marcus, the gray-haired, serpentine chairman of the board, walked in. He looked at the empty chair behind the mahogany desk, the chair that had belonged to Liam's father, then Liam, and soon him. The police have officially declared the Bronx building a total loss, Isabella, Marcus said, his voice like dry sandpaper. 3 bodies were found, though the fire was so intense that DNA confirmation will take weeks. The world thinks he died trying to be a hero in the slums. Isabella laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. He died for a girl who wasn't worth the shoes she was wearing. Now, let's talk about the board meeting tomorrow. The merger with the London firm needs to happen immediately. Once the signatures are dry, the pension funds will be reallocated, and we vanish. Back in the library basement, Ella was looking at the screen of her laptop. She was watching the security feed of the LK Tower. She had hacked into the system using Liam's private administrative bypass, a key they thought had died with him. She saw Isabella in the office. She saw the way Isabella sat in Liam's chair, her feet up on the desk. "She's in your seat, Liam," Ella whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and cold fury. Liam walked over, standing behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and for a moment, the heat of his touch was the only thing keeping her grounded. He looked at the screen, at the woman who had tried to murder them. "Let her enjoy it, Ella," Liam said, his voice dangerously calm. "The higher she climbs, the longer the fall. Tomorrow, that chair becomes her electric seat." "We can't just walk in the front door," Liam continued, turning to the maps of the building spread across the table. "Security is under Marcus's control now. We use the service tunnels, the ones my father used to move machinery in secret. They lead directly to the boardroom's private elevator." He looked at Ella. She was exhausted, her face smudged with dirt, but there was a steel in her eyes he had never seen before. "Are you ready to be a ghost, Ella? Because tomorrow we don't just ask for justice, we take it." As the night deepened, Liam found himself unable to sleep. He walked over to the cot where Ella was finally resting. He looked at the memory thread on his wrist. It was a ruin, but it was still there. He realized that for 10 years he had been building walls to protect a boy who was already dead, but Ella had brought him back. He sat on the floor beside her cot, watching her breathe. He didn't know if they would survive tomorrow. He didn't know if they would end up in prison or in a grave. But for the first time in his life, Liam Kingsley felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The morning sun rose over Manhattan, but for Liam and Ella, it was just a countdown. The world was waking up to news reports about the tragic loss of a visionary, while the visionary himself was crawling through a damp, narrow-maintenance tunnel 5 stories underground. "Watch your step," Liam whispered, his voice echoing against the cold iron pipes. He was leading the way, holding a small tactical flashlight. The space was so tight their shoulders brushed against the wet concrete walls. Ella was right behind him, carrying the laptop and the box of truth wrapped in waterproof plastic. Her heart was drumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every drip of water, every scurrying rat felt like a security guard's footstep. "Liam," she panted, the air growing thin. "If we get caught here, they can just bury us in the walls. No one would ever know." Liam stopped and turned around. In the cramped darkness, his eyes were the only source of light she could see. He reached out and squeezed her hand, a firm, grounding grip. "I've lived in these walls my whole life, Ella. I know every secret they hold. They won't bury us. They're going to set us free." They reached the mechanical room, the heart of the LK Tower. Huge turbines hummed with a deafening roar, vibrating the very floor beneath them. This was the service elevator that bypassed all the high-tech biometric scanners of the main lobby. Liam pulled a small device from his pocket, a black box he'd spent the last 4 hours in the library basement building. He attached it to the elevator's control panel. "What is that?" Ella asked, shielding her eyes from the sparks. "A digital ghost," Liam replied, his fingers flying over the wires. "It tells the system the elevator is empty and undergoing maintenance. We'll rise to the 100th floor as a glitch in the software. Isabella's security team won't see a thing." As the elevator began its slow, silent ascent, Liam turned to Ella. He reached into a bag he'd brought from the safe house. Inside was a clean, sharp black suit, not his usual $10,000 tuxedo, but a simple, powerful outfit. And for Ella, a deep emerald silk dress he'd managed to secure through an old, loyal contact. "We can't walk in there looking like survivors," Liam said, his voice turning into the general again. "We have to walk in like the owners. Change, now." The elevator car was mirrored. As they changed in the moving box, Ella watched the transformation. The soot was washed away, the wounds were hidden under silk and wool, but the eyes were different. They weren't the eyes of the girl from the Bronx or the boy from the meadow. They were the eyes of two people who had seen hell and decided to take over the furnace. Liam helped Ella zip up her dress. His hands lingered on her shoulders for a second too long. He looked at her in the mirror. "You look like a queen, Ella," he whispered. "I don't want to be a queen, Liam," she replied, fixing his collar. "I want to be the jury." The elevator dinged, floor 99, just one floor below the lion's den. Through the small gap in the doors, they could hear the muffled sound of voices. The board of directors was gathering. They could hear Isabella's sharp, high-pitched laugh, the sound of a woman who thought she had inherited the world. Liam looked at his wrist. The blue bead was hidden under his crisp white cuff. He took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and corporate greed filtering into the elevator. "Ready?" he asked. Ella gripped the laptop case. "Let's go haunt them, Liam." Inside the boardroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the cold, metallic tang of betrayal. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his fingers drumming a victory march on the polished mahogany. To his right, Isabella was looking at her reflection in a silver spoon, adjusting her pearls. "Gentlemen," Marcus's voice rasped, "the tragedy of Liam Kingsley's passing is a heavy blow, but the market waits for no one. With his death and no legal heir, the control of LK Industries falls to the board. We signed the merger with the London Group today, and by tomorrow, we will be the architects of a new era." The board members, men in gray suits with gray souls, nodded in agreement. They didn't care about the boy who died in the fire. They cared about the decimal points in their bank accounts. "And the girl," one of the members asked, "the assistant who died with him?" Isabella's eyes flashed with a cruel light. "A social climber, a footnote in history. She's ashes now, just like her father's reputation. Let's not waste more breath on the dead." Suddenly, the lights in the boardroom flickered. The massive 110-inch screen at the end of the room, which was supposed to show the merger contract, started to glitch. Static hissed like 1,000 snakes. "What is this?" Isabella snapped, looking at the IT technician in the corner. "Fix it." I can't, ma'am," the technician stammered, his face turning pale as he looked at his monitor. "The system is being bypassed. It's coming from inside the private executive elevator." "That's impossible," Marcus growled, standing up. "That elevator is locked down. Only Liam had the—" The sound of a ding echoed through the room. It was a soft, polite sound, but in the dead silence of the boardroom, it sounded like a thunderclap. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room didn't just open. They were pushed with a force that made the brass handles groan. First, a shadow fell across the expensive carpet. Then, Liam Kingsley walked in. He didn't look like a man who had escaped a fire. He looked like a god of vengeance. His black suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly swept back, but his eyes, they were cold, dead pits of gray fire. The room gasped. One board member dropped his glass, the crystal shattering on the floor. Isabella's face didn't just go pale, it turned a sickly, bruised shade of white. She looked like she was seeing a demon. "Liam," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. You were in the Bronx, the fire." "The fire was a bit warm, Marcus," Liam said, his voice silky and dangerous as he walked toward the head of the table. "But I've always preferred the heat to the cold silence of a grave." But the shock wasn't over. Liam stepped aside and Ella walked in behind him. She was wearing the emerald silk dress, her head held high, her eyes fixed directly on Isabella. She wasn't the dirty assistant anymore. She looked like the ghost of every secret Isabella had ever tried to bury. In her hand, she held a single, scorched blue bead. "You missed a spot, Isabella," Ella said, her voice echoing with a terrifying calm. The truth doesn't burn as easily as paper. Before anyone could move, Liam slammed his hand onto the table. Lock the doors. No one leaves this room until the jury finishes its work. The electronic locks hissed into place. The boardroom was no longer a place of business, it was a courtroom. The boardroom felt smaller now, the air conditioning struggling to cool the rising heat of pure, unadulterated panic. Isabella was clutching the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles looked like white stones. Marcus tried to regain his composure, adjusting his silk tie with shaking hands. "Liam, this is a miracle," Marcus stammered, his face a mask of sweating plastic. "We thought, the news said, we were just trying to protect the company's interests in your absence." "My absence," Liam leaned over the table, his shadow stretching across the board members like a dark cloud. "You mean my murder, Marcus, or perhaps you prefer the term corporate restructuring." Liam didn't wait for an answer, he nodded to Ella. She walked to the center of the room, her emerald dress shimmering under the LED lights. She didn't look like a girl from the slums, she looked like the angel of death. She opened her laptop and connected it to the massive screen, but she didn't show the merger. The screen flickered and suddenly a high-definition recording of the Bronx apartment fire played. It wasn't from the news, it was from a hidden camera Liam had planted in his own car, which had been parked across the street. The video showed the cleanup crew bursting into the building. It showed the explosion. And then a private audio recording started to play. It was Isabella's voice, clear as a bell, recorded through an encrypted intercept Ella had set up. "Make sure they're inside. I want the girl's father's name to be the last thing they hear before it blows. Liam is a loose end. Burn the box, burn them all." The room went deathly silent. One of the older board members looked at Isabella with pure disgust. "That's not all," Ella said, her voice cutting through the silence like a diamond-tipped saw. While Isabella was busy playing arsonist, she was also playing thief. "Marcus, I'm sure you'd be interested to know that the offshore account you thought you shared with her in the Caymans, she emptied it 4 hours ago. She was planning to leave you to take the fall for the mill fire while she vanished to Switzerland." Marcus turned his head slowly toward Isabella, his eyes bulging. "You, what?" "She's lying," Isabella screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "She's a data analyst, she can forge anything. Liam, don't listen to her, she's the daughter of a traitor." Liam walked slowly toward Isabella. He didn't yell, he didn't hit the table. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out the singed, yellowed note from the archive, the one Ella's father had written. "My father told me you were loyal, Isabella," Liam said, his voice a deadly whisper. "But he forgot to tell me that loyalty to a ghost is just a fancy word for greed. This note, it's been DNA tested in the last 6 hours. It has my father's fingerprints and Samuel Brooks' blood. It proves my father gave the order to let the men die. And it proves you've been using that secret to blackmail this board for a decade." Liam turned to the security cameras in the room. "The police are already in the lobby, Marcus, and I've already sent this entire server to the district attorney. You didn't just lose the merger, you lost your lives." Isabella looked around the room, searching for an exit, a friend, a lie, anything. But all she saw were the cold, judging eyes of the men she had tried to rule. She collapsed back into her chair, the Queen of LK suddenly looking like a broken doll. Ella walked up to her, leaning down until they were eye-to-eye. "My father died a hero to save people he didn't even know. You tried to kill people you called family. That's the difference between us, Isabella. I have the Bronx in my blood. You have nothing but empty silk." The boardroom, once a sanctuary of secrets, was now a cage. Isabella's breathing was shallow, jagged, like a cornered animal. She looked at the door, then at the screen, then at Liam, who stood like an executioner at the head of the table. "You think you've won, Liam?" Isabella's voice was no longer a whisper, it was a shriek. She lunged for her designer handbag on the table. "You think you can just bring this, slum girl, into our world and tear it down? I built this company while you were busy mourning a childhood that never existed." She pulled out a small, gold-plated pistol, a luxury weapon for a luxury killer. The board members scrambled, falling over their chairs, diving under the table. Isabella pointed the gun directly at Ella's heart. "If I'm going down, I'm taking the one thing you actually love. Let's see how your legacy feels when it's covered in her blood." Liam didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his CEO status or his billions. He stepped directly in front of Ella, his wide shoulders shielding her completely. He looked down the barrel of the gun with a cold, terrifying smile. "Do it, Isabella," Liam challenged, his voice steady as a mountain. "Prove to everyone in this room that you're exactly what I said you were, a murderer. But know this, if you pull that trigger, you'll never see a courtroom. I'll make sure the last thing you see is the face of a Kingsley who finally stopped caring about the rules." The tension was a physical weight, ready to snap. But before Isabella could pull the trigger, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom were blown open by a tactical ram. Police, hands in the air. The SWAT team swarmed the room like a black tide. Red laser dots danced across Isabella's chest and forehead. The gold-plated pistol clattered to the floor as she was tackled to the ground. Marcus tried to blend into the shadows, but Liam pointed a finger at him. And him, Marcus Thorne, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and embezzlement of pension funds. I have the digital trail ready for your forensics team. As the handcuffs clicked shut on Marcus's wrists, he looked at Liam with pure hatred. Your father would be ashamed of you, Liam. You destroyed the Kingsley name for a ghost. No, Marcus, Liam replied, looking at the memory thread on his wrist, which was now visible to the whole world. My father was the ghost. I'm finally becoming a man. As the police dragged Isabella out, she screamed, her hair disheveled, her silk dress torn, a far cry from the queen she was an hour ago. She looked at Ella one last time, her eyes filled with a venomous insanity. I'll be back, Brooks, you hear me? I'll burn you again. Ella didn't say a word, she just watched the elevator doors close on the woman who had tried to erase her family. She felt a strange, cold peace. The dungeon was finally empty. The room was a wreck, papers were scattered, chairs were overturned, and the remaining board members were trembling in their seats. Liam turned to them, his presence filling the void left by the chaos. This meeting isn't over, Liam said, his voice echoing. But before we talk about the merger, we have a debt to pay. Miss Brooks, if you would join me at the head of the table. The boardroom was silent, the air still vibrating from the screams of Isabella and the heavy boots of the police. The remaining board members sat like stone statues, their faces pale, waiting for Liam to pass judgment on them for their years of silence. Liam didn't sit in the CEO's chair. Instead, he pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table and gestured for Ella to sit. Liam, I can't, Ella whispered, her voice still shaking from the adrenaline. Sit, Ella, Liam said, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable authority. For 10 years, my family sat in this chair while yours sat on the cold floor of a tenement. Today, we balance the scales. As Ella sat down, looking at the city of New York through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she felt the weight of her father's memory finally resting in peace. Liam turned to the board members, his eyes narrowing. Effective immediately, the Kingsley Mill Relief Fund is being reinstated. Every dollar Isabella and Marcus stole from the pension funds will be returned with interest. And the name of the engineer who caused the fire, in our official records, in our press releases, and on the memorial plaque in the lobby, it will be changed. He paused, looking at each man in the eye. It will say, Samuel Brooks, the hero who saved the Kingsley legacy. And one more thing, Liam continued, clicking a button on his remote. The massive screen behind him, which once showed Isabella's crimes, now showed a live feed of the thousands of journalists gathered outside the LK Tower. The world wants to know how the dead CEO came back to life. They want to know why the police just dragged out my CFO and chairman. We are going down there, and Ella, you're going to be the one to tell them the truth. They left the boardroom and walked through the office. The same employees who had whispered about Ella's cheap shoes and poor background now stood in total silence as she walked side by side with Liam. When they reached the lobby, the glass doors opened to a sea of flashing lights and shouting reporters. Liam stepped to the microphone, but he didn't speak. He looked at Ella, stepped back, and gave her the stage. Ella looked at the cameras. She saw her reflection in the glass, a girl in an emerald dress, no longer hiding in the shadows of the Bronx. My name is Ella Brooks, she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. 10 years ago, my father was labeled a criminal to protect a billionaire's bank account. Today, the fire that tried to bury the truth has finally burned away the lies. My father didn't die for a machine, he died for the people inside it. And today, I'm here to tell you that the Kingsley Empire is no longer built on secrets. It's built on the memory of a man who had nothing but his honor. Behind her, Liam watched her with a pride that transcended business and wealth. He reached down and touched the memory thread on his wrist one last time. Then, in front of the whole world, he untied the frayed, blackened string. He didn't throw it away. He placed it in Ella's hand, closing her fingers over it. I don't need the string to remember you anymore, Ella, he whispered, loud enough only for her to hear. I have the girl. The flashing lights of the paparazzi faded as the heavy glass doors of the LK Tower closed, but the silence inside was even more deafening. Liam and Ella stood in the lobby, surrounded by security guards who didn't know whether to salute them or arrest them. The building was a hollow shell. The CFO was in handcuffs, the chairman was a traitor, and the stocks of Kingsley Industries were plummeting like a stone in a dark well. Liam looked at the digital ticker on the wall. The company's value was dropping by millions every second. "The world hates a liar, Ella," he said, his voice dripping with a weary irony. "I gave them the truth, and now they want to burn the castle down anyway." Ella looked at him. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fire in the boardroom was gone, leaving behind a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours and whose entire world had just turned to ash. "They don't hate you, Liam," Ella said, stepping closer. "They hate the ghost of your father. You're the one who has to show them that the man living in the castle now is different." Suddenly, the lobby was flooded with people, not reporters this time, but the secondary board. The minor shareholders, the hungry lawyers, and the cousins of the Kingsley family who had stayed in the shadows while things were good, but were now smelling blood in the water. Leading them was Alastair Kingsley, Liam's uncle, a man who dressed in tweed and spoke with a snake's grace. He walked up to Liam, ignoring Ella as if she were a piece of furniture. "Liam, dear boy," Alastair said, his voice oozing fake sympathy. "A noble gesture, truly, very cinematic, but you've committed corporate suicide. The board is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. You've compromised the brand by associating with the daughter of a man who, hero or not, cost us billions in insurance." Liam straightened his back, the Ice King returning for a moment. He stepped between Alastair and Ella. "My uncle, I wondered how long it would take for you to crawl out of your vineyard in Napa. If you think I'm stepping down because I chose the truth over a merger, you've forgotten whose name is on the front of this building." "The name is Kingsley, Liam, not Brooks," Alastair hissed, his eyes flicking to Ella with pure malice. "The shareholders are terrified. They want stability. They want someone who isn't compromised by a childhood crush." Ella felt the sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She saw the way Alastair looked at her, the same way Isabella had. To these people, she was a glitch in their perfect, wealthy system. She walked forward, standing right beside Liam. "Mr. Kingsley," she addressed Alastair, her voice cold and professional. "I am the lead data analyst for this firm. If you want to talk about stability, maybe we should talk about the $400 million in hidden debt I found in the subsidiary companies you manage. Debt that Isabella was helping you hide." Alastair's face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. He stuttered, his tweed and grace facade crumbling. You have no authority to access those files." "I have the authority of the man who owns the servers," Liam said, a smirk playing on his lips. "And it seems, uncle, that you have a lot more to explain than I do." Liam turned to the security detail. "Escort my uncle to the holding room. He'll be joining Isabella for a chat with the federal investigators." As they dragged Alastair away, the lobby cleared. It was just Liam and Ella again. The sun was setting over the Hudson, casting long, golden shadows across the marble floor. "It's not over, is it?" Ella asked. "No," Liam sighed, looking at his bare wrist where the thread used to be. "The war with Isabella was a skirmish. The war for the soul of this company. That's just beginning. And I can't do it alone, Ella. I don't mean as an assistant. I mean as a partner." The news of the arrests had spread through the LK Tower like a virus. While Liam was in a closed-door meeting with the legal team, Ella had to walk through the main floor to retrieve her personal laptop from her old desk. As she stepped out of the elevator onto the 80th floor, the bullpen, where the top analysts worked, went silent. It wasn't a respectful silence, it was heavy with resentment. To them, Ella was the basement girl who had somehow bewitched the CEO and brought the police into their sanctuary. "Look at her," a voice whispered, loud enough to be heard. It was Sarah, a senior analyst who had been Isabella's shadow. Wearing silk and acting like she owns the place. She didn't find the truth, she just seduced the boss to get revenge for her traitor father. Ella stopped, her grip tightened on her bag. She didn't want to fight, but the Bronx Ella wasn't going to take it lying down. She turned and looked Sarah right in the eye. "My father was a hero who died so your parents could have a paycheck. And if you spent more time looking at the red flag reports instead of gossiping about my shoes, maybe you would have noticed that your mentor, Isabella, was stealing your pension fund for the last 3 years." The room went cold. Ella didn't wait for a reply. She walked to her desk, grabbed her things, and left them standing in the ruins of their own arrogance. She realized then that winning the war in the boardroom was only half the battle. Winning the hearts of the people would be much harder. Hours later, Ella entered the CEO's office. The air was thick with the scent of bitter coffee and the hum of high-powered servers. Liam had his sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded on the floor, surrounded by glowing monitors showing the stock market's catastrophic fall. "It's a bloodbath, Ella," Liam said without looking up. "The investors are panic selling. The London group pulled out of the merger. By the time the markets open tomorrow, Kingsley Industries might be worth less than the land it's built on. Ella sat down across from him, opening 3 laptops at once. Then we don't look for investors, Liam, we look for the people. What do you mean? The people who work here, the families of the men who died in the fire, the public who thinks we're just another corrupt empire. Ella's fingers began to fly across the keys. I've been tracking the sentiment analysis on social media. People are angry, but they're also inspired by the story. They don't want a merger with London. They want a company they can trust. Liam watched her, mesmerized by the way her brain worked. She wasn't just counting numbers, she was reading the soul of the market. Look at this, she pointed to a graph. If we convert 15% of the company's private equity into a public trust, giving the workers a share of the ownership, the stock will stabilize. It turns the Kingsley scandal into the Kingsley revolution. You won't be the billionaire king anymore, Liam. You'll be a partner. Liam leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his tired face. It was a radical, dangerous move. It would make his uncle Alistair and the rest of the board lose their minds. You're asking me to give away part of my kingdom, Ella, he whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. I'm asking you to build a kingdom that won't burn down, she replied. The tension of the numbers faded for a second. Liam stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. He reached out and grabbed Ella's hand, pulling her to stand beside him. My father always told me that people are tools. You use them until they break, then you replace them, Liam said softly. But sitting here with you, seeing how you fight for a father who had nothing, I realize he was the one who was broken, not the tools. He turned to her, the moonlight catching the scars on his hand from the fire. If we do this, Ella, there's no going back. We'll be fighting the entire financial world. Are you sure you want to be by my side for that? Ella squeezed his hand. I've been in the dark for 10 years, Liam. I'm not afraid of a little more heat. The sun began to bleed over the Manhattan skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of bruised purple and gold. It was 8:00 a.m. In 1 hour, the New York Stock Exchange would open, and Kingsley Industries was predicted to crash. The lobby of the LK Tower was packed, not just with reporters, but with the factory workers, the janitors, and the low-level clerks. They had been summoned by an emergency, all-hands meeting. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. They expected to be told the company was bankrupt and they were all fired. Liam stepped onto the podium. He wasn't wearing his CEO power tie. He wore a simple black sweater, his sleeves pushed up, showing the bandage on his arm and the bare wrist where the blue bead used to be. Beside him stood Ella, her presence no longer a secret but a statement. For 60 years, Liam's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing in every hallway of the building. The Kingsley name stood for profit at any cost. My father built this empire on the backs of men like Samuel Brooks, then tried to erase their names when things went wrong. The crowd stirred, you could hear a pin drop. Today we stop building on lies. I am canceling the merger with London. Instead, I am announcing the Brooks Kingsley Trust. 30% of this company's shares are being transferred today into a fund owned and managed by the employees. You are no longer just workers, you are the owners. A roar erupted from the lobby, a sound of disbelief, joy, and hope. On the news screens, the sentiment meter spiked. The public wasn't selling anymore. They were buying. They weren't buying into a company, they were buying into a cause. But while the world cheered, a different kind of sound was heard in the visiting room of the Metropolitan Detention Center. Isabella, stripped of her silk and pearls, sat behind a thick glass partition. Across from her sat a man in a shadow, a man whose face wasn't on the board, but whose money fueled the entire city. They think they've won, Isabella hissed, her eyes bloodshot. They think a little charity will save them, but Liam forgot one thing. My father didn't just work for his father, he recorded him. There's a second vault, and it's not in the building, it's in the meadow. The man in the shadows leaned forward. The meadow in Everlie Hills. Yes, Isabella smirked, a jagged, terrifying expression. If Liam and the girl find it, they'll realize the fire wasn't the only crime. The real secret is buried under the very ground where they played as children. Destroy the meadow, and you destroy their souls. Back at the tower, the celebration was in full swing. Liam and Ella stood on the balcony, watching the city. We did it, Liam, Ella whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. We saved the company. Liam looked toward the north, toward the distant hills where their childhood home stood. He felt a strange chill, a premonition that the war wasn't over. The blue bead in his pocket felt heavy. We saved the name, Ella, Liam said, his voice dropping an octave. But I feel like the earth is about to open up under us. We need to go back to where it all began. The celebration in the LK Tower felt like a fever dream. The workers were hugging each other, the Brooks Kingsley Trust was trending globally, and for the first time in a decade, the air didn't smell like corporate greed. But in the quiet corners of the building, the old guards, the ones loyal to the Kingsley name, were whispering. Ella walked back to the executive floor, her heart lighter than it had been in years. But as she passed the security station, she saw a group of guards huddled around a tablet. They stopped talking the moment they saw her. "Is there a problem?" Ella asked, her analytical brain immediately picking up on the tension. "No, Miss Brooks," the head of security said, his voice cold, just adjusting to the new ownership. "Some of us preferred it when we knew who the boss was." Ella realized then that changing a contract was easy, but changing a culture was a war. These men had been paid by Isabella and Marcus for years to look the other way. To them, Ella wasn't a hero. She was the one who stopped the dirty money from flowing. Liam was in his office, staring at a single envelope that had been delivered by a private courier. No return address, just his name written in a handwriting he recognized instantly. His father's Arthur Kingsley. Ella walked in and saw him standing there, the paper trembling in his hand. "Liam, what is it?" "It's a dead man's switch letter, Ella," Liam said, his voice hollow. "My father had it set to be delivered if Isabella was ever arrested. He knew she was a snake, he knew she would eventually try to take over, but he also knew I might try to fix things." Liam read the letter aloud, and every word felt like a drop of acid. "Liam, if you are reading this, you have chosen the path of justice. You were always too soft, too much like your mother. You think by giving the company to the workers you've saved the name, you've only opened the door to the shadows. The fire at the mill wasn't the beginning, son, it was the cover-up. If you want to know what truly lies beneath the Kingsley fortune, go to the meadow, look for the stone angel, but be warned, some truths are better left buried." Ella felt a chill run down her spine. The stone angel, that's where we used to hide our time capsule when we were kids. Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with a new kind of dread. "My father didn't just hide money, Ella. He hid something that made Isabella and Marcus terrified of him, something that gave him power over everyone. We have to go, Liam, before Isabella's man in the shadows gets there." As Liam's car sped away from Manhattan, heading toward the rolling hills of Everleigh, he looked at Ella in the passenger seat. She was looking out the window, her hand resting on the blue bead in her pocket. "Are you afraid of what we'll find?" Liam asked. "I've already lost everything once, Liam," Ella replied, her voice steady. "The only thing that scares me now is the silence." The asphalt felt like a black ribbon unrolling into the past. As Liam's SUV left the neon glare of Manhattan behind, the air changed. It became cooler, smelling of wet earth and pine, the scent of Everleigh hills. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The hum of the tires on the road was the only soundtrack to their thoughts. Ella watched the trees grow thicker and the houses grow further apart. Each mile was a year being stripped away from her life. "I haven't been back here since the night they threw our furniture onto the sidewalk," Ella said, her voice small, almost lost in the darkness of the car. Liam gripped the steering wheel tighter. I stayed in that big, empty house, looking out the window at your dark porch every night. My father told me you moved to a private school in Europe. He told me you were happy." Ella gave a bitter, dry laugh. "I was learning how to count pennies for bread, Liam. I was happy if the heater worked for 2 hours." They pulled into the outskirts of Everleigh. It wasn't the paradise they remembered. Since the mill fire 10 years ago, the town had withered, stores were boarded up. The Kingsley Mill, once the heartbeat of the valley, stood like a blackened skeleton against the moonlit sky. Liam slowed the car as they passed the gates of the old meadow. The fence was rusted, overgrown with thorny vines. "It looks so small," Liam whispered. "Everything felt so giant when we were 10. "The world is only big when you're safe, Liam," Ella replied, stepping out of the car. The grass was waist-high, swaying in the wind like a sea of ghosts. They walked through the meadow, their flashlights cutting through the mist. The ground was uneven, hidden by shadows. Liam led the way toward the old oak tree, the one they used to climb to see the stars. And there, hidden behind a curtain of weeping willow branches, stood the stone angel. It was a moss-covered statue, its wings chipped, its face worn away by a decade of storms. It looked sad, as if it were mourning the children who used to play at its feet. "My father's letter said look beneath the angel," Liam said, his voice trembling. He knelt in the dirt, digging his fingers into the cold mud. His hand hit something hard, not a rock, metal. He cleared away the earth, revealing a heavy, rusted iron box, much older and more sinister than the one they had found in the archives. This wasn't a corporate record, this was a private hoard. As Liam pried the lid open with a crowbar, a foul, metallic smell wafted out. Inside were not just papers, but photographs. Old, grainy photographs of his father shaking hands with men in military uniforms, and a series of ledgers titled The Phoenix Project. Suddenly, the meadow was flooded with light, not the moon, but industrial-strength spotlights from 3 black SUVs that had silently surrounded them. A man stepped out of the central vehicle. He wasn't a thug. He was wearing a tailored gray suit, carrying an umbrella despite the lack of rain. It was the man from the prison, the benefactor. "You really shouldn't have dug that up, Liam," the man said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly polite. "Some legacies are meant to stay buried. My name is Silas, and I'm the man who kept your father in power. And now, I'm the man who's going to make sure the Kingsley name finally dies tonight." The meadow, once a sanctuary of childhood whispers, had turned into a kill zone. The industrial spotlights from the SUVs blinded them, turning the mist into a wall of white fire. Silas stood there, leaning on his umbrella, watching Liam and Ella like a scientist observing ants in a jar. While Liam stood as a human shield, Ella's trembling fingers flipped through the scorched pages of the Phoenix Project. Her breath hitched. These weren't financial records. They were blueprints for chemical weaponry and photographs of human agony. "Liam," Ella's voice was a jagged thread of horror. "The mill fire wasn't an accident or an insurance scam. Your father was testing illegal chemical agents under the guise of textile manufacturing. The workers who died, they didn't die from smoke. They were the failed data of a leak. The fire was started to incinerate the evidence and the witnesses." Silas clapped slowly, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Bravo, Miss Brooks. Your father was a simple man. He thought he was protecting his friends. He didn't realize he was a pawn in a game played by kings. Liam, your father was our greatest partner. This box, it's not just a secret. It's a death warrant for anyone who touches it." Liam felt his world shatter. Every effort to redeem the Kingsley name had been a lie built on a mountain of corpses. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with a cold, lethal rage. "You think you can bury us here like you buried them," Liam growled. "I activated a ghost protocol before we arrived. If my heart stops, every file in this box is uploaded to every major news agency on the planet." Silas chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Liam, you still think the world runs on data. The world runs on lead. My men jammed every signal in this valley 10 minutes ago. Your ghost is trapped in the machine." Just as Silas raised his hand to give the order, a hiss of white smoke erupted from the tall grass behind them, a specialized gas canister. Through the thickening fog, a figure emerged. It wasn't a soldier. It was a woman in tattered work clothes, holding a double-barreled shotgun with the steady hands of a hunter. "Get down," the voice commanded. It was Ella's mother. "There are maintenance tunnels under this oak tree," she shouted over the sudden chaos as Silas's men began to fire blindly into the smoke. The workers built them as an escape route from the gas leaks years ago. "Liam, Ella, get in now." The trapdoor beneath the ancient oak tree slammed shut just as a hail of bullets shredded the bark above them. Liam, Ella, and her mother plummeted into a narrow, damp tunnel that smelled of rust and decades-old fear. "This way, keep your heads low," Ella's mother commanded, her flashlight cutting through the thick, stagnant air. Liam looked around in shock. These weren't just maintenance tunnels, they were a hidden map of the town's misery. On the walls, workers had carved their names and the dates they spent hiding from the chemical leaks. It was a cemetery without bodies. "My father knew about this," Liam asked, his voice echoing off the damp concrete. "Your father built the walls, Liam," Ella's mother said without looking back. "But my husband and the workers built the exits. They knew the Ice King would eventually try to melt everything down." Above them, they could hear the heavy thuds of Silas's men searching the ground. Suddenly, the ground shook. Silas had realized they were underground and was using explosives to cave in the tunnels. "We have to go faster," Ella cried, clutching the Phoenix Project box to her chest. They reached a heavy iron lever near an old ventilation shaft. Ella's mother stopped. "This lever controls the old gas mains. If I pull it, the pressure will blow the surface of the meadow. It'll stop them from following, but it will erase the stone angel and everything else." Liam looked at Ella. The meadow was their only happy memory. Destroying it was like killing their childhood for the second time. "Do it," Liam said, his eyes hardening. "The memory is in us, not the dirt. Let it burn." Ella's mother pulled the lever. A low growl started deep in the earth, followed by a roar that sounded like a dying beast. They sprinted toward the exit, a hidden hatch 2 miles away near the river, just as the ground behind them erupted in a pillar of fire and mud. They emerged by the riverbank, gasping for air, covered in soot and grime. Behind them, the meadow was a blackened crater. The stone angel was gone. Silas and his men were cut off, buried under tons of debris, but Liam knew a man like Silas wouldn't die that easily. Liam turned to Ella. Her emerald dress was ruined, her face was smudged with dirt, but she held the box of evidence like a shield of pure gold. Chapter 2 is over, Ella, Liam whispered, taking her hand. The company is ours, the secrets are out of the dirt, and the meadow is gone. There's nowhere left to hide. So what happens now? Ella asked, looking at the distant lights of New York. Now, Liam said, his voice cold and sharp as a diamond, we stop running. Chapter 3 isn't about survival, it's about execution. We're going to find every man who funded Silas, every politician my father bought, and we're going to dismantle their world brick by brick. As the sun finally rose, a lone black car, sent by Liam's one remaining loyal contact, pulled up to the riverbank. They got in, the Phoenix Project sitting between them. The Ice King was gone, the girl from the Bronx was gone. In their place were the two most dangerous people in America,